I'm very open about the fact that I'm polyamorous. I currently am in a 4-person polycule. They're my little family. We call ourselves the Constellation. There's me, my husband Neil, who I've been married to for 10 years, my other romantic partner Scott, who I've been in a romantic relationship for the last almost 3, and my husband's romantic partner Dan, who he's been with for about 3 years. Now, normally, I talk specifically about my romantic partners because when people have questions about relationships, they're mostly asking me about romantic relationships for ace people. So I kind of talk about those more. But Dan is every bit my partner in as my other partners are. But my relationship with Dan is not sexual or romantic. Dan is a queer platonic partner for me. People have a lot of confusion about queer platonic relationships and queer platonic attraction. Like, what does that mean? What are those relationships like? Who can have them? And I thought it was time for me to make a video about queer platonic relationships and talk about what they are and what they're like through the lens of my own experience. And hopefully answer some of your questions about what they are, if you're curious about building them or just making more space in your life to support and affirm them. So let's talk about queer platonic relationships. So let's start with talking about what queer platonic attraction is. Queer platonic attraction is a kind of attraction that exists in that middle space, that somewhere space between romantic attraction and platonic attraction. When I talk about queer platonic attraction to people, I like to say, well, to think about this attraction as queering platonic attraction, creating something that is different, changed, holding some qualities, not containing other qualities, in a kind of indefinable space that exists between two things we commonly understand. So queer platonic attraction can contain some elements of platonic attraction or romantic attraction, and it can also contain some undefinable qualities that don't really fit into boxes neatly otherwise. I can't really give you a checklist that says these are the things that make an attraction queer platonic. That's really up for you to decide, for you to place your feelings into a label if that's what you choose to. But queer platonic can hold space for all of those attractions and feelings we have for people that exist in that in-between space, in between platonic and romantic. So what are queer platonic relationships? A good way to think about queer platonic relationships is to think of them as committed, intimate relationships that are not romantic in nature. So it's a kind of relationship that exists in that in-between space, somewhere in between romantic and platonic. So a relationship may contain some of the features that we associate with romantic relationships, like commitments and sharing practical life things like houses and bills and all of those features. It can also contain intimacies that are traditionally connected to romantic relationships. So those are the things that a queer platonic relationship can look like. Just romance is not part of the equation in that relationship. What a queer platonic relationship can be based on are things like queer platonic attractions, or alterous attractions, or just simply platonic attractions. Queer platonic relationships can also be great for aspec folks who have shifting or fluctuating experiences of attraction. So thinking like ace flux or arrow flux folks. A queer platonic relationship might be just the right kind of connection and relationship structure to make them feel as fulfilled as possible. Now, what happens in a queer platonic relationship is entirely up to the people in it. So it can contain whatever kinds of intimacies or whatever kinds of commitments feel right to the people in it. And queer platonic relationships can be both monogamous or polyamorous. So yeah, you can have one queer platonic partner, or you can have 4 queer platonic partners if that's the kind of relationship structures that feel the best for you. Most important thing to remember about a queer platonic relationship is that it is a bit of language that is designed to capture those relationships that don't fit neatly into our heteronormative boxes that exist around romance and sex. Queerplatonic relationships define those indefinable spaces for relationships and connections between people. So if a relationship in your life is in that kind of in-between space and you're having a hard time like placing it neatly into one box or another, that might be something that looks queer platonic. So who gets to have queer platonic relationships? Well, really, anybody can have a queer platonic relationship. Someone who is ace, someone who is aro, someone who is allo, everyone can be part of a queer platonic relationship if that is the right kind of language to define what's going on between you and the other person or persons. But queer platonic relationships are particularly useful for people on the ace and aro spectrums. When you're ace or aro, it's very likely that you are going to exist as an individual outside of the norms and expectations that come along with sex and romance for everybody else. Heteronormativity has a lot of rules about sex and romance. And a lot of times, ace and aro folks, because of how we experience attraction and how we want to organize our romantic and sexual lives, we just can't live up to those expectations and norms. So that means that it's going to be harder for us to exist inside those relationships that rely on those norms. Queer platonic relationships offer ace and aro people who are existing outside of those norms a way to live authentically and live fully inside of a relationship that imagines them. Queer platonic relationships understand that ace and aro lives are real, ace and aro intimacies and affections are possible, and that they should have a space to be celebrated. So while anybody can be part of a queer platonic relationship, they are particularly useful for folks on the ace and aro spectrums. They are places where we can be our full selves and where our full selves are acknowledged and affirmed. So how do I find a queer platonic relationship? Well, the easy answer here is ask for one. One of the best ways that you can ensure that you find the kind of relationship you want is to communicate to the people who are the possibles out there the kind of relationship you want. And if queer platonic relationship is the kind of relationship that you feel is going to work for you or that you want to explore, let that be known. Share that with people. Let people know this is the kind of relationship or relationships I'm open to and I'm looking for. Now, I know that makes it sound really Pollyanna easy peasy, that if you just ask for it, then it's going to show up. And that's not, I don't believe that. I recognize that this is hard. You're going to go out into a dating world where people are unfamiliar with queer platonic relationships. They may have never even heard of them. And when confronted with the idea of them, they may have a lot of really strong negative ideas. They may think it's weird or foreign or completely not for them, and they could never do it. People out there in the dating world may have a very narrow idea about the kind of relationships that are possible for them. And if you ask for something outside of that, of course, they're going to push back and say no. And that rejection absolutely sucks, and it absolutely hurts. And it can be certainly hard to keep asking for things that you don't get. However, we don't get what we don't ask for. One of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves as aspec people who are looking for non-normative relationships that exist outside of what is typically expected of us is to ask for those things and be upfront about them. Share that those are things we want, that they're important to us, even if people feel weird ways about them. If you ask for what you want, even if you don't get it, you are saying that you believe that your needs, your desires, and the kind of relationships you want to build are valid and worthy. And that's a really valuable thing. So while you may have to do some educating about queer platonic relationships, you may encounter people who are at least curious, people who are open to hearing you out and open to maybe trying out a queer platonic relationship. You never know until you ask. So the best way to find one is to go out and look for one. Go out and ask for one. And always remember, you deserve to ask for what you want. So that's a very quick introduction to queer platonic relationships. I hope that that is helpful for you as a beginning place, as a starting point to a further exploration. Just getting answers in this short form to these very simple questions doesn't tell you everything you need to know about queer platonic relationships. It's a complex subject because human relationships are complicated. So there's a lot more nuance and a lot more to learn. Go out in the world, search queer platonic relationships, look for people who are creating content about them online, and try to find other people who have them and talk to them. Get more information if it's something that you're curious about. Go, explore, learn, and pursue a queer platonic relationship if it feels like the right thing for you.